All right, just hello everybody. We're just letting everybody kind of find their way in here from a participant level. We'll get started here in about 2 minutes once we let everybody bend their way in. Okay. So thanks everybody for taking an hour out of your time to do a video call, which I'm sure everybody is missing. So thanks to everybody for joining the next edition of the Kili webinar series. This time we're talking about Contextual, which is obviously has gotten a lot of publicity and a lot of airtime over the last number of months. And so the question really becomes what's real, what's not. We've assembled a team of experts here where we can debate all these various different questions. I'd encourage everybody that is in the webinar here to use the Q&A tab. Feel free to write in your questions. If you want to direct them to one of the panelists, feel free. We will get you in and out of here within an hour, I promise. But we'll try to pick up your questions where they fit into the actual dialogue. And if we don't get to them in the actual debate, we'll pick them up at the end. This will be recorded. It will be available on the Kili website post webinar. So if you have to jump off because you've got a call or something like that, feel free to find your way to the Kili website probably later today or tomorrow, and you can find it. So with that, let me start with the introductions. Maybe starting with Aaron. Aaron, do you want to introduce yourself, where you work, and then pass it to one of the other panelists?
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I am Erin Medorsky. I'm really excited to be here to chat with these fine folks, especially since Neil is wearing pink today. I am a managing director at MIQ. I oversee commercial practices for the Northeast region. And for those who are not familiar with MIQ, it is a technology-enabled service business. We support both agencies of all sizes and brands directly with all things programmatic end-to-end. With that, I will pass to Scott.
Hi there, everybody. Scott Messer, SVP of Media at Leaf Group. Leaf Group is a publisher, so we own the eHow, Livestrong, Hunker, Well and Good, Sciencing, Only in Your State, and about 40 other brands. And I oversee revenue operations for our team as well as one of our publishing divisions. Very excited to be here and chat with everybody. Ryan?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Hi, everybody. My name is Ryan McBride. I lead product strategy over here at Oracle Advertising. That's across the suite formerly known as Oracle Data Cloud. Went through a rebrand this year. I came through the Grapeshot acquisition in 2018, so I've been doing this context thing for quite a while now. Started over there in 2015 and led partnerships and business development. Had the chance to work with some of you guys over the course of the last couple of years, so looking forward to talking.
I guess by a process of elimination. My name is Kasper Skov. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Semasio. We spent the first 10 years of our existence doing semantic custom audiences. But then when user level trackability and targetability started coming under pressure, we thought it might be good to have another leg to stand on. And so as we are semantically based, we then expanded into contextual, and we did it in a way where we sort of unify the targeting across audiences and contextual into one form of targeting that we call unified targeting. So really happy to be here today. And I think this is a very hot yet under debated topic. So I think this is a good initiative.
Yeah, and last but not least, I'm Neil Sweeney. I'm the CEO and founder of Kili. If you're not familiar with Kili, our mandate or what we're trying to do as a company is we're really trying to put data that underneath the control of the consumer. So if you go to Kili today, you can put in an identifier, whether that's a phone number or an email address, verify you are who you say you are, and we will amalgamate all the data that we can readily find under you, allowing you to put it underneath your control. What you choose to do with it after that is up to you. If you'd like to be compensated, great. If you'd like to protect it and opt out, you can do that as well. So let's get going here. Interesting as Kasper mentioned, this idea of contextual is getting a lot of buzz, but let's just level set here and define what we believe contextual to be, because I'm not sure everybody that is in this that is participating or listening in fully understands that. So maybe considering, Ryan, you've been around this for so long, especially through GrapeShot, why don't you start with this? And then I want to get into some of the misconceptions around what Contextual does and does not do.
Yeah, sure. So the way that we kind of look at what context is, are really the kind of surrounding circumstances of an event, right? For our purposes here, in the way that we all kind of operate in the AdTech ecosystem, let's call that event an impression. So really kind of the things that lead up to that, looking at things like content classification surrounding the impression, location, the adjacency of other placements, even things like sponsorships and alignment of your brand with certain types of content can all be considered forms of context. I'm going to bust out a little bit of Latin for you guys here. I didn't know if you were expecting that, but so if you look at like the root of the word context, it's con and textere, which means weaving together. So how about that? Yeah, you like that? Pretty good. Yeah, so if you take that into account, basically what we have is like trying to connect different data connections to understand relevancy and circumstance.
I like it. He's been sitting on that Latin thing for a while, just waiting to lay it out there. That's awesome. Anybody want to add or contribute to that as well before we move into some of the meat of the debate?
Maybe one thing that Ryan explicitly didn't mention, which is time. All right, so a context is also about time. And I think that's one of the things that we haven't talked too much about. It's the fact that, we always talk about the right user at the right place at the right time with the right message at the right price. And yeah, programmatic has made us very able to do that. But I think the more we look into this and start to look at sort of further developments in contextual targeting, the more important we see that time is.
Interesting. That the comment that programmatic allows us to do this, I want to dig into that a little bit, because one thing that we've debated in the past, some of us in the group call has been, is the programmatic pipe kind of living up to the expectation of what contextual can be, and where are we in that matching of what contextual can really be in its ideal state and what programmatic can deliver. And let's talk about some of those areas where maybe the handoffs aren't happening that we'd like to see. And Scott, maybe, I know you've got some opinions on this. Do you want to talk through this a little bit?
Oh, where to begin? So on the programmatic side and the pipes, like what we have is what signals are going in and what information surrounds it. And it's really, there's two things for it. There's targeting and there's measurement. And so when we look at context and whose context, I think is also important, because context is subjective and it's an understanding. As that goes through the programmatic pipes, I don't know if buyers know exactly what they're buying. And I don't know if buyers are fully analyzing the data that they have, or if they're getting enough data to run really good analysis and sort of triangulate all their measurements and targeting to perhaps a precision that they were used to with cookie-based identifiers.
Aaron, for someone sitting on that side of on the other side of the equation, any thoughts?
Well, I'm going to start with your first question, which is, and pull into what Scott said. I always like to think of things quite literally and how they are in real life, and then apply that digitally. And so for me, context is as much background understanding as you can have in order to make a decision. And I think that sometimes there's been a little more of a narrow consideration for context of just being about like, well, this is the page and therefore you put this ad on this page. And I think a little bit to what both Ryan and Casper said, there's a lot more that can go into making a contextual decision. And I think that is, you also asked what was perhaps a misnomer. I think one of the misnomers is that it's not a data-driven decision, or that context is like very top line and very surfacey, and that there's not, and I think that's one of the things that's drastically changed over time, is how much data goes into a contextual decision. So to what Scott said, I think I would just say there's so much that goes into that we can continue to talk about, because a lot of it comes from either the tech enablement and industry alignment on creating standardization around what data and information can be passed back and forth. We can get into some of what's being done to help advance that, but it also very strongly depends on the publishers and their sort of personal decision around what they do want to end up sharing and how much they want to participate in offering contextual signals in more regularly and more granularly into the programmatic ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think this is an interesting kind of point we're covering here, because we're getting two very interesting perspectives from the buy side and the sell side. And I think this is where the promise of context really should be in the programmatic ecosystem, is that connection point, right? Ultimately, what we're trying to do here, and this kind of goes for all third-party data signals, like we're trying to make the buyer's journey into fulfilling campaigns the way that they want and driving the outcomes they want easier to do, right? By leveraging technology solutions, third-party data signals, and really kind of things that they need to drive performance. And I think the balance there is making sure that we are proactively engaging with the publishers whose pages we are crawling and categorizing, to have that proactive conversation, to have them understand, listen, this is the way the buyers are engaging. You should be leveraging these kind of data connectors as a way to speak to the buy side and kind of position your inventory for the premium assets they are.
I guess the one question I have is that on the buy side, are those that are actually buying contextual understanding the richness and the levels of data that are available to them, and are they taking advantage of that? And if not, I mean, it's not fair to say this, but a lot of people will think, oh, contextual is the page and it's the URL and that's kind of it. Clearly that's not it, but I wonder, where is that breakdown? Because clearly, if you can get in front of an audience and extract data from a page, I mean, there's tons of really valuable data and interesting information that can make for a very powerful experience. I just wonder, and this is an open question for everybody, whether or not the buy side is fully utilizing that, and if that is the case, how can we fix that?
Well, from our perspective, there is still a pretty rudimentary understanding of contextual targeting on the buy side, but that's also logical because they used to work with it, right, in the noughties, as we say in Europe, I suppose. And now, because of the pressure user level trackability, targetability has come under, there's so much innovation going on in contextual targeting. And going back to your previous question, like, is programmatic living up to that promise? I absolutely think that programmatic is a fantastic foundation on the basis of which to go out and do some of this much more sophisticated decisioning. Because what is programmatic doing for us? It is giving us a range of attributes on a bid opportunity. Maybe we have a user ID, maybe we don't. Maybe we have a usable URL so that we can actually know what the context is. Maybe we don't. Maybe we have a device ID. Maybe we have geolocation. We have so many potential features going into that decision. And in a certain sense, to go back to Ryan's Latin lesson there, I mean, weaving all that together, weaving as many of these features together as possible to make the best possible decision as to what we should be doing with that bid opportunity, programmatic is fantastic for that. And just to plug Sandra for a second, then I'll stop. Nowhere is that clearer than in their new real-time integration, where they break down the traditional boundaries between different forms of targeting that we're used to, between audience, between contextual, between technical. It all just becomes targeting. So what they're doing is they're truly weaving it together, and they're saying, here are all these attributes. You get them all. Maybe some of them are not instantiated. Maybe there's not a user ID. Maybe there's a flock. Maybe there's a usable URL. Maybe there isn't. Maybe there's geolocation. You take all of these attributes on the bid opportunity, which is just its own complicated context, and then you make the best decision you can as to what you should be doing with that impression. And that is so far the pinnacle of programmatic that I've seen. And we're very, very excited to be leaning into that.
Foundationally strong, Erin?
I do want to thank Ryan for his Latin lesson today, because I always loved weaving, and so I love the idea of that. It's very artistic and visual. But what I wanted to say is, I'm not sure that the buy side is, as you asked, Neil, is really as aware of what's going on in contextual, and that's what they're buying into. And I think they're not necessarily, because we were successful as an industry to move people off of that. If you think about the origins of this, the way things started was context was where you wanted to be. You wanted to serve an ad based off of the mind that the reader and the consumer was in, and you wanted to connect with that, and that drove great performance. But the supply, there was limited supply. So in order to create greater supply, we said, well, never mind being in context, you can drive performance through audience. And it pushed heavily on audience. A lot of people did. Not when I say we, I'm using sort of like the industry. It was like, who cares if you're in context, if you know this person purchased this product, or if you know that they used to be in that context? Won't they still care about sports if they cared about sports yesterday? And so I think we were so successful as an industry to move people into the idea of audience that contextual just sort of like took a back seat. But it's always been a performance vehicle. And I think now that programmatic gives us the tentacles to being able to process more pages and more data at scale, we can actually solve that initial problem of, is there enough scale to be focused on context, which drives great performance? So as a performance vehicle, I think people are really bought in, but I don't think they're necessarily saying, I want contextual to drive that performance.
Yeah, and real quick, Aaron, I totally agree. I mean, we've seen a lot of changes from a privacy regulation standpoint over the last few years, right? We all know GDPR, CCPA, continued kind of scrutiny around data collection processes here. And what that's done is kind of set a little bit of a course correction across AdTech data signals, in the sense that we have to kind of take a step back and re-educate a lot of players who have candidly kind of had a misconception of what context is over the last 10 years, right? We had a very aggressive push into people-based marketing and identity-based services, and those are still solid tactics and they're great products, but it really drove us away from leveraging context as a performance vehicle. So now that there continues privacy regulation and changes around data availability, we are starting to get a lot of buy-side partners like, all right, trying to learn what's involved in context, right? It's no longer buying the sports section in a newspaper. There's a lot more innovation and evolution of these kind of technologies that we've kind of built and put together in the market that allow you to have a really good informed point of view in the media you're buying to drive different levels of strategies and performance tactics.
I want to ask Aaron kind of quickly, when you're talking about performance and tactics, you made the point that contextual isn't in a silo and that it should be part of this overall plan. I don't know the answer to this. Is that, where does this fit into the plan? Is this fitting in underneath kind of the programmatic side of the equation? And if so, is it open? Is it private marketplaces? And as a follow-up question, we talk about this great foundation of programmatic as being this great vehicle for contextual. If that's the case, why don't we have all kind of tier one contextual inventory available programmatically? Wouldn't that suggest that maybe something's missing from that great foundation? So I don't know who wants to take those two.
I feel like the first part is me and the second part is Scott. I think on the first part, yeah, I think where we're at right now is that it's like a hybrid and a fusion of using the multiple vehicles for driving a particular outcome. I think we've got the buying community aligned around digital can help you drive outcome. It can do so against multiple screens, multiple devices, and there are multiple data-driven routes to doing so. And when you get them into that mindset, they're like, okay, let's look at that and talk to us about some of those routes, but they're not coming to you saying, I need a contextual buy in order to make this work. And we're not necessarily responding in that way, but it is behind the scenes, it is one of the primary vehicles that we use to drive performance. So we'll take an audience and we'll bump that up against context, and we'll start to look at the history of where a particular audience has performed, and we'll create all sorts of machine learning predictive setup around that so that we can kind of drive greater performance. And in that way, context is driving performance. We looked at our top 10 advertisers across MIQ, and 72% of the performance we're seeing is coming from a contextual strategy. So in that vein, it is very much a performance vehicle, but it's not necessarily being identified as such. And I think that has to do with the varied utility of context, whether it's being looked at as something for brand suitability, whether it's being looked at for something that's about, brand connectivity, the more upper funnel creative aspect of contextual alignment, or if it's being looked at as a performance vehicle. But Scott, your part too.
Yeah. And, I think the availability of context is an interesting thing, and like whose context you're looking at. In that, as you say, like you're measuring campaigns against performance and audience, and you're understanding like what audience performs better in which context. You're assuming you're measuring that against the context that you've seen and the context that you know, but that context changes the next day. And as publishers create content every single day, there's a lot of context that's unknown. And certainly the classification of it isn't completed the day it's published, and it may take a little while. So for buyers to move into new environments is a challenge, because the speed of context isn't necessarily readily available for buyers at all times. So you may know what audience works in articles that we published before that live on our site or that work on some other publisher's site. But there's a lot of publishers that have similar content or contextual environments, but because your data doesn't overlap into them, you won't be able to get access to those, and you won't be able to activate your audiences inside that. So I do see where technology plays like a really big part in bridging the gap between buyers and sellers. But I have some sort of sharp words for tech that wants to build a bridge without including both sides in that equation. Because the truth is that publishers own this content, and they create the environments for where these situations occur and where great context is, whether it's opening a checking account or how to change my tire or what makeup or hair care things you're interested in. That all comes from the publisher, and that is very valuable to them. And we know that those audiences are valuable to the publishers and to buyers. And so it really irks me when I hear that context is being separated from publishers, and it's being bought sort of independently and without publisher buy-in, partly because you don't know when the contextual is right or wrong, and publishers have a lot more depth inside their context. So I'm open for tech solutions that include publishers that want to bridge into buyers, so I can give you back more data, so I can give you more access and more visibility. But I'm sort of against solutions that don't include us and allow DSPs to buy our inventory at the cheapest and lowest price, because frankly, we'll probably stop putting a lot of that context out there for you.
So
if that continues.
I want to dig into this one a little bit, because if we remove this, the name of this webinar as being around context, and we actually go back whatever 10 plus years and we talk about programmatic and the open pipe, this is a very similar conversation where we saw a lot of long tail publishers embracing the open pipe as a way to be efficient and move inventory. We saw a lot of premium publishers feeling that the tech wasn't necessarily matching them, and so they stayed on the outside. If we fast forward to today, and we don't feel that there is a symbiotic kind of relationship between the tech and the individual publishers, are we doomed to kind of repeat the same mistakes that we made as we kind of moved into the open RTB pipe? And how do we avoid that? Because clearly there's valuable inventory that's very powerful on the publisher side, but if it remains on the sidelines, that's not good for anybody on the programmatic side. So let's maybe debate that one a little bit.
Yeah, I can start there. I think it goes back to a little bit about like the question earlier, Neil, where we were like, does the buy side fully understand what context is today? I think it's equally important to have those type of proactive conversations with the sell side as well, to understand the way that data partners and DSPs are valuing their supply. At the end of the day, when a publisher works with an exchange or services inventory across a programmatic channel, they are selling supply, and a lot of other players are influencing the value of that supply, right? It has to be a bi-directional relationship where data partners are out there working with the advertisers, marketers, agencies, informing them on the ways to be efficient and drive success for campaigns. But it also has to operate on the sell side, where it's like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is the way that we operate. This is the way we categorize your supply. Is this kosher with the way that you want to sell your inventory? And is this the best tactic for you just to surface on the open exchange? Like, can we do multi-publisher deal IDs? Can we curate packages and PMPs across your network for you to surface, leveraging contextual classification to be pushed to these channels as well? So it's going to be different based on the publisher and based on the appetite and the campaign they're looking to drive and what they're looking to fulfill here. But ultimately what we provide, especially for the long tail, is a common language, right? We are a standardized common language that the buy side is using to classify content, whether it's for targeting or for avoiding certain types of content. And we can easily hand that over as a translation layer to the sell side to engage with the buy side the way that they want to, basically connecting the two by offering a common language for them to value their supply and sell their supply the way they want it.
And to take that one step further, and you'll like this one, Ryan, I think we will see contextual targeting increasingly undergo the same evolution as audience targeting did, where in the beginning you had all these shelf products, and then increasingly it became about custom audiences. I think we'll see that increasingly it'll become about custom contextual, because Scott, as much as you guys have insights into your own inventory and you understand that and you have deeper signals and all that stuff, there is another party, the party spending the money, which has a specific audience or specific contextual target it wants to reach. And the probability that you will exactly have that on the shelf, you know, is maybe not super high the more niche it gets. And so for the buy side to be able to curate its own contextual target and then actually superimpose that onto the inventory landscape is a way to actually upcycle, or at least to derive unique value from whatever inventory you have that actually conforms to that. And so that whole idea that a publisher has to sit down and has to try and think of all the potential contextual products that the buy side would conceivably want from them. It's just not fair. And that's where I think that custom contextual targeting is super interesting, because it allows the buy side to say, this is exactly what I want, almost like an X-ray machine, and then basically use that X-ray machine on the landscape of inventory and find the exact pockets of value that they want to target, and they will value that, and that value will accrue to you. Yes, there'll be the AdTech tax that we all talk about, right? But at the end of the day, just like with audience targeting, the value creation of the match between what the buy side really wants and the fit to your inventory will accrue to you.
Not entirely. So the creation of third party, and first I agree with that about custom targeting, and publishers that have sophisticated contextual businesses can create custom contextual segments. And we do work with technology providers to help us with that. Like there is no shortage of vendors that we need help with. But third-party data was largely created by credit card data, by connecting pipes and transactions and a bunch of other things that weren't really derived from publishers, especially when you talk about like retargeting and cart abandonment. All that valuable data was not created from the publisher. In a contextual setting, all of that data is created by the publisher and it's passed to the advertiser either through the bid string or through semantic crawlers. Raise your hand on this call if you have semantic crawlers. Yeah, Ryan, you got one. You don't, Aaron, but you license them. And a lot of people do. And so what they're doing is they're crawling our pages, they're slowing down our sites, they're occasionally like crashing some of our sites as they go through and strip mine our pages for contextual information. They store the entire body of the context. They used to be terrible and they used to just do like URLs. And now they do like full body pages. And so people have our maps of the internet and they have our indices, and they've taken that from us. So we can no longer provide that as a service. So we've been literally disintermediated from that value. And what we're talking about is, how do I get fair value for that so that I can continue to make great quality content, good journalism, and all the things that we need for the internet to survive. So you can't just think that like context is made by without the publisher. It's a byproduct of our work. And I think that if you want access to it and you want to have great context, you need to work with the publisher. Nobody asked our permission. It was literally stolen from our pages. We can talk about whether it's actually stolen or not. It's legally not. I get it.
Hey, just before you chime in, Aaron, just for the audience here, Scott, if you could just help kind of define what those semantic crawlers are, because I think there's not everybody understands what that is.
Sure. So semantic crawlers like Googlebot that looks up is indexing everything for search. They're very similar. They're robots, spiders, like sort of whatever you want to call them. They go through your website. They start on one page, they go to the next page, and then they go through the trees and they read everything. And as they do that, they're consuming the content like a human being. They're downloading the information that's on the page. And that is their way of downloading your library. Anybody can do it to anybody else. It just takes time and money and a little bit of computer power. When you see things like do not crawl directives and you want to de-index things from search, you're telling robots not to do it. And you can tell robots not to do that, but there's good robots, there's bad robots, and you have to manage that process. So when we see semantic crawlers come across our sites, we make decisions of whether or not we want to let them in, but typically it's too late. They've already done their thing. So those are semantic crawlers. And you might as well, if you really want to work with someone, you might as well just give them your database and save your servers the hassle of having a bot crawl it all the time.
Yeah, and just to add on a little bit there, so Grapeshot's traditional core crawling mechanism, the reason why I didn't raise my hand is we kind of defer our methodology more in the probabilistic lens than semantic lens, but then we're getting into semantics in itself there, so that's fine. We do have
you have a text crawler.
Yeah. So the one thing that I would caveat there is, I mean, at least in our methodology, I can't speak for every other crawler out there. I'm sure there are bad players in the space too, but our methodology is fully passive. So if you raise your hand and say that I want to service my inventory across a programmatic channel that our Oracle services work with, that supply is being surfaced for a transaction and then being approved for crawling through those pipes. Like the Grapeshot spider is not out there just searching the web for everything that gets published and exists. It's more with partners that we work with where we have tag fires, integrations, solutions that are being brought to us where we classify the content. So just the quick caveat there on that piece. It's not like it's just collecting the entire web. It's more when it's brought to us, we classify it.
We appreciate the clarification, but you're still crawling the web. It's
Sure.
okay. It's okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
but this crawling that is contentious, it's the pre-processing at the URL level that is a solution because the passing of data through the bid stream that could potentially be monetized and give the value back that you're looking for isn't actually functioning to the level that it could be in the future. And so that it kind of strikes me back to what Casper was saying in terms of what programmatic is and the promise of programmatic. And to Neil's earlier question, if we can get the pipe to actually work, if we can get the data passed through and the DSP is willing to process it, because it's really costly to process that, which is one of the reasons that people aren't moving forward with that, wouldn't that be an opportunity then to say, the more data I pass you, the more parameters I pass you, the more I'm going to charge you for that. So therefore you get some return back to you. And the more opportunity you have for people to say, this is valuable to me, or this is, and see greater return. And then nobody will have to crawl without your permission.
Yeah, but I'm struggling with this because we're talking about crawling with permission versus not permission. I mean, it's the wild west.
I don't really want people crawling with or without permission. I understand that it happens. And I see that, passing data is something that publishers are getting better at. And we're trying to create common standards. You can join pre-bid and join those discussions. You can join the IAB and join those discussions. There's a lot going on in Tech Lab right now with data standards and transparency. There's DMPs that are working on this, like ours is permutive, and we're working on solutions like that to find these common languages that are more common than just the Oracle taxonomy, but are really agreed upon. I'll take this moment to do my ingredients, recipes, and chocolate cakes.
Oh, yes. The chocolate.
Everybody needs to know that there are chocolate cakes. There's all different kinds of chocolate cakes. Think about all the chocolate cakes you ever had, and they're different kinds. Those are contextual segments. What is a finance buyer to the four of us on this call is different for everybody. And those are different understandings of chocolate cakes. Somewhere, the difference is the ingredients that get used, whether it's gluten-free flour or regular flour or brown sugar, white sugar, granulated, whatever it may be. And then there's the recipe of how it's combined. Those ingredients are what is on the page. That is the raw context. And then there's the recipe of how many times does somebody have to visit the finance section before they become a finance attender? How many times do they have to do X, Y, or Z to make it into our model? That's the recipe. So to find a common language, not only do we have to agree on standardizing ingredients, but we have to agree on the recipe. And then everybody can get the same chocolate cake, or you can at least call them different things. So ingredients, recipes, and chocolate cakes. Always when you're evaluating contextual vendors, partners, and things like that, ask them what ingredients you're using, how are you blending it together, what does your cake taste like?
And Scott, that was my exact point, that through the noughties, the sell side tried to do that and created a bunch of little islands, or sometimes big islands, right? And then through the teens, the buy side sort of had the pendulum swing to its side, also with the provenance of DSPs and so on, DMPs and all these things. And now the buy side, the agencies, the trading desk, the MIQs of the world and so on, could sit there and actually completely define their own recipe. And then they could find where that recipe was met by the ingredients that were offered to them. And that is kind of to be honest, the problem I have with this swinging back the pendulum to agreeing on recipes. Yes, I mean, it's possible. I feel like it's a regression, and I feel like we shouldn't be going back to the thesis just because we went to the antithesis and now that's coming under pressure. I think we should actually try and find the synthesis. And so I personally don't really see a final state where we end up in the sell side once again dictating what the recipe should be. I think we will find, I think the final state will still very much be the demand side, the buy side of the market, having at least a lot of say in what the recipe looks like, and then using that recipe across the inventory landscape. And whenever there's a match, actually rewarding the publisher for it ultimately, because the publisher provided the right ingredients, whether it be on the user level, that's audience, or whether it be on the complex weave that we're calling context, right? At the end of the day, that match, the delivery of the right ingredients, it does lead to value capture, significant value capture by the publisher from my point of view.
Yeah. We never know when that happens because of the lack of transparency that we have of what triggered a buying decision.
Right.
And so as everything gets bought through the open auction, we don't know how to necessarily value our inventory except basically on price, which is okay. But it also, I don't know who to work with and who to reward and who to give more data to and who to give less data to. So when we don't have the sort of circle back in the equation where we can see things through programmatic pipes like private auctions, preferred deals, PG deals, we can't see what's working or who's helping. And so it's very hard for publishers to lean into a solution when we're not getting any feedback on what's working.
Yeah. One promising thing that, sorry, Ryan, is that the pendulum is swinging back to the sell side in the form of sell side targeting. This is something we've been leaning into a lot. You have as well, Ryan, I've seen from your marketing material, which is basically saying, look, if we have the pendulum swinging back, then let it swing back to the SSP, for instance, and give the targeting information to the SSP so the SSP knows what the buy side is looking for, because that allows it to do a couple of really interesting things. First of all, if the sell side now knows what the buy side is looking for, it can traffic shape to it, as one of my business buddies calls it. Second of all, of course, yes, we had a stay of deprecation of 2 years for a third-party cookie, but it's still coming under a lot of pressure. So moving that degree of separation closer to publishers, to users, is obviously in its own right super interesting. What does that create? That creates a very unique situation where the sell side is telling you, where the buy side, sorry, is telling you what it's looking for, right? So it's almost like if you have a grocery store, right? And what I think you were lamenting before is you never know what the client is going to buy when he goes into your grocery store. Well, now he's going to order ahead. right? So he's going to send you his ingredient list, so you know exactly what he's looking for. You can make sure you have the stock, and now you also understand what he values, and then you have a connection via, for instance, a PMP, a deal ID, right?
I
So
love
that is what
and
I
then I make
mean.
sure that I have enough inventory for them.
Yes,
Because
yes,
what
traffic
Aaron
shaping.
doesn't see is all of my audience and context that gets sold before it goes to the open auction. Like there's a lot of inventory that gets reserved.
But you do.
and
You know.
I know I'd love to manage all that for our buyers. And that's why I think you're right about sort of ordering ahead is a fantastic thing.
Yeah, it's a synthesis. It's not just, you know, that's why I think that this upheaval, these categorical blog posts by Google are basically creating a lot of dynamism. It's unsettling things and creating in the process really interesting new thoughts, like really upsetting the apple cart and letting us find new, maybe more equitable equilibria.
I think that's exactly right. And I think the one thing real quick too, I actually want to hear Aaron's point of view here too, because I think we're representing a lot of our own commentary about the buy side and how they operate here. But ultimately, if we are, as a publisher, servicing supply in the open exchange, right? If we proactively leverage the existing data solutions that the buy side and advertisers, one, have demanded from an addressability, targeting, suitability standpoint to run scaled strategies across their campaigns, if we lean into that as publishers, and we take that as a way to bring curated supply in whatever control mechanism you want, right? Sell your homepage direct, sell your PMPs, your deal IDs through your SSPs, and use data solutions like Context to curate inventory packages and bring them proactively to the buy side through these pipes, through PMPs and deal IDs. We've seen publisher partners and publisher networks see huge value increases in their clearing rates and their CPMs when leveraging data solutions as a kind of a bridge point with the buy side and the inventory they're looking for. So if you're leveraging these solutions the right way, we can help you guys get the right value for your supply.
Let me ask Aaron a question. What happens when publishers come to you with like a contextual targeting idea? Like we have finance intenders, we have people opening checking accounts, we have these things. And let's say you have a client that matches it and like it's pretty close. Then what happens?
Doesn't really go. I mean, I'm more, we work with so much supply. We work with so much data. We work with so many different tech partners. It's more the other way around. It's like we speak to all of the different verticals and all of the different buy side audiences. And we say, what would you like to get done? Where do you have a problem? Are you looking to find people who want to open up a checking account? Are you looking for people who just bought a new house and they need a mortgage? Are you looking for people who shovel their walks when it snows? And then we tap into all of the extensive routes we have for supply and audiences to say, this is the way we're going to make this happen. And we look at the historical of where performance has been driven, and we maybe will do some outreach. And if we need something special and custom from a publisher in that particular instance, but again, there's so much scale and so many different routes to accomplish a marketer objective that's more the direction that we take.
So let me try to see if
back into your point.
Yeah. Publisher provided data is largely irrelevant to the buy side equation.
Well, what I wanted to say is I think that type of a statement potentially comes into play when we collapse all buy side into one bucket. And I think that's one of the dangers that programmatic takes, is that it's like, well, what does programmatic deliver? It's a performance vehicle, and therefore what does it take to drive performance? But that's not the reality. If we really want to extend the value and the benefit of programmatic using contextual and all other mechanisms that exist, we need to be able to think about how does it relate to the many different minds of the marketer and the many different objectives that they have. And that's where I think it's interesting to look at and think about contextual. Is like, yes, very readily it's a performance vehicle, but there's something else that it does. And how do we quantify that? And I think that's your point, Scott. All of the custom editorial content and the journalism and the integrity that goes into there that creates a relationship with the reader and the view, like how does that get transacted? And how does that can that get transacted in a programmatic ecosystem, or is it just two different veins?
So how does a publisher get rewarded for having high quality journalism, content, award-winning things? You know, it's like these excellent environments, right? Third-party data lit up a lot of shady environments because cookies were present and that's what you bought. It's a little harder to fake context today.
How come?
How does a publisher get to say like my context is a better environment than someone else's? You know, how do they get rewarded for that? Or is like everything just worth $1 if you're in this context bucket?
Economics in my view, and that's where programmatic is really exciting again, because it allows you to measure the quality of inventory in the sense that if you're advertising a very premium sedan, you know, that is just going to fly better in a premium environment. It's also going to attract, the premium environment is going to attract premium users who can actually buy this product. And that's where seeing context very broadly as this weave that Brian started with, and saying actually the user plus the context plus the time plus the message actually together creates the value. Now, does that necessarily match up with the subjective perception the publisher might have of the quality of certain inventory? No, but then I just have to be really cheeky and say, isn't that then a delusion? Right? At the end of the day, if it doesn't manifest itself through the actual KPIs it delivers to brands, aren't we then deluding ourselves about the quality of this particular inventory? I mean, I remember 7 years ago at a conference in Berlin, we were talking to premium publishers from Germany about this problem. And I said, listen, people, the quality of inventory will never go away. Yes, we have gone into a frenzy about auctions, about real-time bidding. It's going to go away, and you're going to see a movement up the quality pyramid when it comes to inventory quality, and you're going to see ways of interacting again between premium publishers and agencies and brands, but infused with the real-time decisioning power of programmatic. And not to toot my own horn, but Brian, when did and Aaron, when did non-bidding programmatic cross the 50% line in the US market? I think it's even 3 years ago where that happened, right? And so inventory quality, relationships with premium publishers, it's what really makes this tick. And the initial frenzy years were just because we had a new toy to play with, in my humble opinion.
Let's change it up here a little bit, because I want to cover a couple more topics in the time that we have. There's a lot of misconceptions sort of specifically around contextual. There's a lot of people that are on this webinar. Knowing that all of you are experts in this space, let's address some of these misconceptions and what you think are some of these misconceptions, and we'll go around the horn here, maybe starting with you, Ryan. And like, what do you think the biggest misconception of contextual is, and how do you see sort of a solution to kind of solving that misconception?
Yeah, this goes back to the education component, and I think the misconceptions are largely based in fact, based on a point of view from 10 years ago, right? But we've evolved past the very baseline archaic methodologies of things like URL scraping, right? Like the only root of the URL, or doing things like exact match. Like, we know those are incredibly problematic tactics and are not effective and accurate and scalable, to be honest. So those are, I think, still today in a lot of the education conversations, there's that initial perception that those are still core tactics being used by context providers, which are things that Grapeshot hasn't ever done. And we've kind of leaned into what we would consider more scalable page level classification, image, video, all the assets available. So we've kind of grown beyond that, I think, is the core misconception that we bump into quite a bit.
Aaron, what about you from the buy side?
I think I think exactly that. I think that the misconception that it's too top line, or that we're not going to be able to be very granular there. I think there's a misconception that we've spoken a little bit about around the relationship with the publisher that can be had. I think there's also a misconception around the utility of contextual, and that it's more of a branding vehicle than a performance vehicle. And and I think that, like I said, I think that just came out of us pushing people to think about performance from audience only. And really, it's always been the original performance driver, and it continues to be so.
Casper, your thoughts?
I think that pretty much sums it up, right? Ryan nailed it with many brands thinking that contextual today is what they had 10 years ago. So they're despondent. They feel like it's a regression back to what we were doing a decade ago. And the thing is that this upsetting of the apple cart is creating so much innovation and is creating something that, just to stay with Hegel again, you know, if contextual of the noughties was the thesis and audience, to Erin's point, became the antithesis that sort of replaced the thesis, then what we're headed for now is our syntheses are starting to see much more interesting forms of contextual targeting, for instance, fed by the behavioral patterns of a first-party audience, starting to get things like time into it, and you know, going to the pinnacle of it with what we talked about. I call it truly unified targeting. It's where you're actually not talking about audience versus contextual versus technical. It all just flows together into that weave. I'm very into that, as you can tell, Ryan. Of just saying, here we have an opportunity to influence. What is the best possible use of that? And that goes way beyond the contextual targeting we did a decade ago.
Scott?
I think one of the largest misconceptions is that you can't trust a publisher to provide contextual signals and recommendations and targeting layers. So work closer with your publishers. A lot of them are scaling up. A lot of them are using great technology partners. You should trust publishers when it comes to context. Let them do some work for you. And you should also ask for some data back. We can give you back more data than you're getting. So if you do deals with us and you transact in certain ways, we'll make more contextual information available to you. But if you're just buying it through the open auction, I'm going to try to give you as little as information as possible.
Great. So we can't have this conversation without talking about contextual's relationship with the cookie. We've seen a lot of movement around contextual, primarily because of the inevitable loss of the cookie. Let's talk a little bit about that, you know, with the few minutes that we have left. How has kind of the focus on the cookie kind of increased the popularity or interest in contextual now that it's been deferred, you know, for a couple of years? What sort of changes have we seen? And maybe we'll start with the buy side, Erin, because you have, you know, a ground level view of this.
Yeah, this is a big one. I think the move towards cookieless and the requirement to find alternative solutions for being able to build an audience and, you know, deliver pre-campaign insights, deliver the campaign, measure the performance, all of that is an opportunity for contextual, because essentially it is the original cookieless solution. And I think what we need to do is help the buying community to identify where their audiences can be located. And so we've got this window of time where we can continue to use all of the audience data we have and all of the contextual signals that we have and create connections between them and map those out so that we can gradually transition from a reliance on some of these bloated third-party audiences and move more into a world where we more heavily and consistently rely on, this is where you're going to find the audiences that should matter to you. And then it becomes more about, these are the environments that should be mattering to you. So it's just sort of like that stepping stone of the language shifting. We're seeing that happen. We like I said, we've always been using contextual in a big way, but we're seeing people start to come around to understanding that because we're spending more time talking about that to assuage some of the concerns that people have with what do we do when the cookie disappears.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
I think it's interesting now that contextual has become separated from cookies in an identity and repeatable manner. So if all the lights go out, as it is in Safari and Brave and Firefox for that matter, you only really have the URL to go off of and whatever information is associated with that. So and that becomes like really your guiding light. It's not about audience anymore. So I would also be wary of people that are translating context into audience. Because that audience is only still available in a third or 2/3 to a half of the internet right now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. And I mean, context as a targeting solution, I don't think it's one size fits all. And I don't think it should be the only solution used. I think there has to be hybrid approaches based on who you are and what you're looking to achieve in your campaign here, right? So like, think about the concepts of like audience retargeting that we've always used in the industry that's based on the exposure of a user to a certain type of page, right? And if you flip that around and you look at the other way, engaging in context targeting is identifying that user while they're consuming that content actively in the right mindset, right? It's not the historical look, it's the active right now. So theoretically, there's a lot of value and connection between traditional cookie-based targeting tactics and context. And I think we should be looking at as an industry, like, yeah, there's inevitable changes around availability, around third-party cookies, but there's still going to be identity signals, right? There's still going to be a lot of open RTB signals that these programmatic infrastructure is built upon for us to leverage technology offerings. So I don't think we should be picking one solution as like the final thing that we should all be dependent on, because what we should be doing is limiting our dependency on single sources of signals and data and having a diversified approach, understanding continued changes in the industry.
That's our perspective as well, is that with looking at cookieless, you're not going to be able to achieve the scale from one vehicle. It's going to be an aggregation of contextual and authenticated and other forms of building a strategy. But I think that both the ability to activate and action off of authenticated data is the same technology challenge that we have that we need to evolve as being able to action better off of granular contextual signals. That passing of that data that's the piece that I feel like needs to be talked about a little bit more, or expedited, or just.
Do I need to mention that I think that we're going to pass authenticated identity to only partners that we work directly with?
Well, we only have 3 minutes left. I don't know if you want to drop that on us now.
I did. It should be no surprise. If you think I want to protect contextual, you should know how I feel about my authenticated users.
So Scott, what about
yeah.
this scenario? You don't send any ID at all. Instead, what you send are basically contextual and audience segments, which have been created by the buy side, sent to you for sell side targeting, and now you can send them back without sending any ID.
That would be possible, except you got to bridge into the buy side's understanding of that user and remembering that user, and that's what they want.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to pass data. It's going to happen. It's in the bid request. Like, our URLs are out there. There's maps of the internet. There's these things out there. What I'm saying is, if you want to do it better and you want publishers to embrace your solutions, or to bring you in closer as a buyer and give you back more signals, or give you price preference or access to inventory higher in the waterfall, you should consider working with them and forming relationships, because that's when we start to give those preferential pieces.
I think that's a main driver behind the fact that very little serious programmatic trading is now done in a bidding environment, because those relationships with the right publishers is exactly what really drives the value.
Let's pause there. I want to open up. Oh, Aaron, go ahead.
I was going to say that directly relates to one of our chat questions. But Neil, it's your show. I'm not going to. I was going to
move to we're into the question period, everybody. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask the panelists, feel free to type them in, and we'll address them over the next 5 or 10 minutes. But Aaron, why don't you pick up where you just started?
Yeah, we got a great question from James, which is just, can scale be achieved efficiently enough working directly with publishers? And I just want to double down on that. We've had instances where publishers will say, well, just email me if you want to do something more granular or more custom. It's imagine that process. So what are your thoughts on that, Scott?
Well, you're right. Scale is hard, but that doesn't mean that you don't have a program that scales, right? Your entire contextual database, and like where you're pulling from and the publishers that are contributing to it, you can scale that. So you have access to larger pools. I mean, GrapeShot started on a couple publisher pages, right? And then they formed partnerships and they moved and they got bigger. All of these SSPs started with 1 or 2 publishers and 1 DSP connected to it. And then they worked on their match rates, and then they scaled up, and then they added more people. The key is to build programs where you can bring more publishers into it and have closer relationships with them overall. We're seeing a lot of the SSPs handle that. Some of the DSPs are reaching into that, and some of the agencies are starting to create larger relationships where they can access more data. So you're right, on a pinpoint basis, it doesn't really scale, but there are larger plays that should be made to bring people into your fold.
Great. So we're coming up for time here. I'm just going to go around the horn. Any final thoughts that you'd like to make sure that we address before we close off? Maybe I'll start with you, Ryan. If you don't have any final thoughts, that's fine too. Just let everybody know kind of where they can follow up with you if they've got any additional questions, or where they can follow you.
Yeah, no, that's all good. I think one of the things here, I think one of the prep questions we had set up is in the teaser for the event is context of fad. So I'll address that as kind of my parting statement here. I don't think it's a fad. I think it's a kind of tool in the toolkit for marketers as we continue to navigate choppy waters. I think there's a lot of changes and there's a lot of fluidity in what the future looks like. And I think marketers and publishers together need to leverage data solutions that exist to find the right value exchange between the two. So more than happy to talk to participants. Shoot me a note, you got my email, all that stuff. This has been great though.
Awesome. Aaron, any final thoughts, and where can people reach out to you if they've got some more questions regarding you and MIQ?
Sure. I would just say in all things, it's about balance. And I feel like where I think we need to go is this like healthy marriage between going deeper with certain publishers, but then also being able to enable, advancing the tech so we can continue to enable at scale. And that's the combination I feel like we've always sort of taken. And I think if we continue to be good at that, we're gonna continue to be meeting everybody's needs. I've loved talking to you all. Thank you. I'm at aaron.madorsky@miqdigital.com.
Awesome. Casper, final thoughts and contact information for people that are interested in what you and the company are doing?
Yeah, I think we've scratched the surface of what programmatic can do. I think we'll see an evolution, a development towards a much more sophisticated, unified form of targeting that we're seeing today. And I think if we have this in 3 years, we will not be talking about audience targeting versus contextual targeting versus technical targeting or anything like that. We'll simply be talking about targeting based on the availability of specific features of a given opportunity to influence, right now known as a bid opportunity. And I think we had a percussive a percussive event in the industry. It unsettled us, it unfroze us just enough to really release some very interesting innovation, and I think that's really cool. As for getting in touch with me, it's simply casper@semasio.com, founder's privilege. And yeah, I look forward to engaging with anyone who wants to talk about these things.
Scott, final words. You get the last bite at the apple here.
Well, that is very nice of you. So I'll get on my soapbox. I'm just kidding. I won't get on my soapbox again. You're very correct that there will be an evolution and it'll all just be targeting. I think the cookie solutions are going to be a big challenge, mostly on the measurement side. That's really key here. Aaron talked a lot about connecting audiences with contextual, but that audience connection only came from cookies, right? So if those go away, we're going to have a much harder time matching audiences to context and an even harder time measuring performance across them. This is why we really have to lean into cohesive and collaborative solutions across publishers, buy side, agencies, ad tech, everybody, so that we can sort of re-glue the parts together in ways that are equitable and fair for everybody in the equation. Because it's not going to be rebuilt the way that programmatic was in 2016, which is, Casper says, the pendulum was all on the other side. It will be rebuilt differently, and it will be rebuilt better. So I look forward to all of that. I thank you for your time, and for whatever it seems like I don't want advertisers' money, I do. So let's
and where can people reach out if they want?
Good clarification.
And
you can get me at scott.messer@leafgroup.com.
Great, thanks everybody. And I'm Neil Sweeney from Killy. You can reach me at neil@killy.io. So thanks everybody for the panelists. Awesome dialogue. Thanks for everybody who took time out of their day. You weren't expecting Latin chocolate cakes, pink blazers, and semantic crawlers, were you? Thanks everybody. We'll see you next month for the next installment.
Bye.
Thank you.